Hi, Greg DeVore here from ScreenSteps with Crystal Kadakia from LCD Group. And we're going to talk now about learning cluster design and strategic performance objectives. When you are creating a strategic performance objective, there's an outcome you want in your business. What does it look like if you're following an LCD model to surround that person or that learner with learning assets? So let's talk first about what a persona is, because I thought that was really interesting, your model, how you really focus in on the personas.
Yeah, absolutely. So, say you set this performance objective now, right, which is your goal for the overall learning cluster, that overall set of assets. You know that because I'm delivering these multiple assets, I have greater confidence that I can change on the job behavior. The next piece of that is really understanding who matters to achieving that SPO and who matters most. And that's where we get into our learner to learner differences action. The main deliverable of that action is to create learner personas. Again, if we contrast this to kind of our traditional models, we typically focus on a single target audience. And we investigate that target audience very in a lot of different ways. Some people just stick with what their stakeholders have told them their audience is. Other people try to do a little more investigation. Even in some of our newer models like design thinking, when we're talking about learner personas, it's usually more from a user experience standpoint. So we do it differently. When we think about learner personas, we are thinking about that on the job change we want to see. And if we were to make some hunches or hypotheses on who contributes the most to that business pain, or who, if their capability was improved, would help us achieve that goal. So we make some hunches on some different groups, and it might not be strictly based on demographics like the usual norms, like level or experience or whatnot. It might be based on motivation, different motivations or different mindsets or different use cases of how someone actually performs that capability gap. So, if we use the time management example, you might find that someone who's in a project manager role has different time management types of concerns than somebody who's in an individual contributor, works on their own, not on projects type of role. And you might decide your learner personas that way. So learner persona, and then of course you go and you test that hypothesis. You might do interviews, you might do surveys, and you really try to understand from those interviews, what is their relationship to the capability gap? What are their challenges specifically to achieve those on the job behaviors? And what types of learning assets are they most likely to use? What are their moments of learning need? What does their flow of work look like? Again, a project manager's day to day work life might look very different from that individual contributor. And we often find in our interviews that we start to hear the same things over and over again as we do these kinds of learner interviews. And we get a lot of really great learning asset ideas. So, in the past, we didn't do as much digging into our audience to understand the more than one target audience that lives within any particular learning initiative. And we didn't necessarily tie those learning assets, our choices on how we deliver training to the people who are going to be using it. We often, to be frank, honestly just do what L&D already knows or thinks is cool. We'll go to our tried and true kind of triad of e-learning, bite-sized videos, and a job aid. Well, there's a lot more than that you can think about with learning assets. And so that's how our learner personas really marries up with our change objective and then gives us clues for what learning assets we want to choose that would make up that meaningful cluster.
I think that's so important, and as I think back on our experiences as we worked with our customers, it's getting into the details of those personas and the situations they're in that makes all the difference. We talk a lot to people about, is this guide going to work for the brand new employee and the experienced one? Is it so long that the experienced one's just going to skip over it and not pay attention to it, or not have enough detail that the brand new person is totally lost? Those types of considerations. Or we talk a lot of with procedures. A lot of people want to record videos for the procedures, And if you think about when somebody has to follow a procedure, they're trying to go step by step through it. So are you going to really make them rewind that video over and over again to do that? So I love how in the LCD model, you're really thinking about this individual, what's their situation, what's their motivation, what's their context, and what are they going to need to get over that, to make the next kind of step in their progress as a learner in that moment. So as we look at, we've talked about personas, we've talked about these strategic performance objectives. What different types of content do you make up a learning cluster assets? What are the different types of things you see people using after they've been through your training?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just kind of vibing off a little bit what you're saying there, one of the limitations of the way we used to do L&D when we just create one thing is that we feel like we have to cram all the content into that class, course, or program. And what happens in that is you do have folks like experienced users who just say, this doesn't feel like it's for me. It has way too much in it. And now I'm having to filter through all of this. So it's really important that we think about personas and we think about chunking up the content and delivering it in the way those folks most need and want it, which brings us to that types of content piece. So when you think about types of content, for us, we organize it by what we call learning touch points. So this was actually a concept we drew from marketing. They talk about customer touch points, and that means all of the different ways, places, and times you could connect with a customer. We think of the same thing, but with learners. What are all the ways, times, and places that we could connect with learners? And we really found that there were overarching three categories: social, formal, and immediate. And sometimes learning assets overlap between these. So social types of learning, those are ones that involve people. Obviously, we all know we love to learn from people. And that can be anything from seeing people's likes and comments on a video all the way to that in-person, perhaps coaching kind of relationship. It really can span that spectrum. And if we're talking about more futuristic kinds of learning assets, that leaves you open, the heading social, to consider things like right now in the video game industry, you often have people playing video games together from all around the world. That's a social experience. Now, I can imagine that in the future being a corporate learning experience. People from around the world, maybe in a manufacturing environment, virtual, right, interacting and solving a problem together. So you can go from very bite size in that social learning touch point of just likes and comments, all the way to something as advanced and complicated as that situation, as that learning asset. In the immediate category, we're talking about things that are 24/7 available. And this is where things like ScreenSteps really fits in. It's totally learner directed. There's no L&D telling you, hey, you have to go to this resource at this time, at this place. It's 24/7 accessible to the learner. So they get to decide, hey, in my moment of need, what's there and how do I get there? So that can be your typical job aid type of learning asset that's housed on a knowledge repository. It could be a little the chatbots that are going on, little pop-ups that are a part of an application. And that's huge because in the past, a lot of times L&D doesn't consider all of these different kinds of assets we're talking about a part of their job. They usually think of that formal learning touch point, that sequenced curricula, whether it's an e-learning or a pathway through videos or a blended learning even. But again, it's that sequence designed that you have to plan to participate in. That's usually what L&D thinks is their job. And everything else they do, we don't really count our effort and time towards it. Things in the immediate category could also be marketing communications about L&D, about a core capability the business wants folks to learn. We don't really think about how every single point of communication is a point of learning. And if that's a well-designed communication piece, people are going to more effectively learn. So that's also one of the reasons why we use the term learning assets, because in the past, we haven't seen all of these little bits and pieces as important or significant. And yet that might be the thing that allows someone to learn in the moment that they need it. And so it really truly is an asset we're creating every time we create even just a little poster that hangs up on a wall somewhere that communicates a learning point, right? Those are all learning assets.
So as you're talking about this, I can imagine. Tell me if I'm wrong, but when you train L&D professionals on this, do their eyes kind of get a little big? Like, I've got to create all this content. Like, how am I going to create all this content? Because traditionally we think of, we've got the LMS, right, and we've got our classroom training that we're going to do, but now you're talking about surrounding people with all these learning resources. What's the reaction there, and how do you kind of calm their fears a bit?
Yeah, I think whenever you're talking about something new, there can be that initial panic feeling like, oh, wow, have I bitten off more than I can chew here? And what's so cool about LCD model is two things. One is that, well, actually, I can think of a million cool things, but these are the two I'm highlighting right now. One is that you still start with essentially the same content pool that would go into your class, course, or set of videos, or blended learning, or whatever. Um, and you're really still with that content pool, but you're now chunking it out. So it's more like a top heavy process, a front loaded process. If you do that change action and learn action really well, at the end, what you're doing is really just divvying up the content that you were going to put in one program into these different assets. So it's not like you're creating a ton more content. It's more the framing and the design of that content that might be changing depending on which asset and which persona you're targeting. So it's a lot more around the chunking piece, and that usually helps calm people down. The other piece is that we were very thoughtful, Lisa and I, about how much change we introduce with the model itself. We really think it's important to respect our time-honored expertise and everywhere that we've come from. And so, sure, we could have introduced something that's really fully brand new. A lot of times when people look at the 5 actions, they'll say, well, this is nothing new. Of course, we set goals. Of course, we learn about our audience. Of course, we think about designing training, and that's kind of and can be an immediate reaction. But since the entire philosophy and the goal is different, it creates a difference in each of those actions. But it's not so far that people can't relate it back to, oh, yeah, I've written learning objectives before. Oh, yeah, I've thought about my audience, but oh, you know what? I really didn't have a guided framework for thinking about my audience. Now I do. So it often is actually seen as more guidance than they've had um, to thinking about these things, and yet still feels very intuitive because it doesn't disregard where we've come from. And we actually have this really great graphic that people love that shows how the LCD model integrates with other models, and that's been really cool because people can see how Addy plays in, or how SAM plays in, or Agile plays in, or design thinking, or Bloom's taxonomy. And so we really show that, hey, you're using what you already have in your toolkit, but you're bringing it under this new umbrella.
Yeah, you're just taking the tools you have, but using them a bit more strategically, right?
Absolutely.
To figure out that outcome. What do you see? One of our focuses at ScreenSteps is to make it so that people can create content and update it very, very quickly, so that you're able to address those unanticipated needs. What do you see as the impact on L&D practitioners when the tools are no longer a friction point, that they can work very quickly they recognize, hey, here's a touch point we haven't addressed, we can respond immediately?
Yeah, this is so key. When you think about modern learning, that's been one of the barriers, is really people choosing tools and having the tools that are easily updatable, that are easily accessible, that make it relevant and keep it relevant. And so when you actually have technology that does all of that almost invisibly for you, it feels invisible to an L&D practitioner. Again, now you're able to spend more of your time focused on the actual design itself, and are you giving these different personas what they need. So I think it's a great, to me, the challenge is people letting go and sunsetting technologies, or programs or courses that aren't serving them and moving to this new piece. I've noticed that in the L&D industry, we tend to do a lot more adding, and we don't do enough of the letting go and sunsetting. And all that does is creates clutter for our learners and for our business and for us to manage. So I think it's great that the technologies are out there now that are in the cloud, that are that are really thinking about user experience, not just from a customer, a learner perspective, but also from an L&D professional perspective to manage and administrate systems. That's great. Wow. Keep doing that. Take all of that out of our way. And L&D professionals, sunset the systems that aren't serving you. Start really doing that. Partner with your internal change management or your internal IT to, make that shift to things that are going to be much easier for you to work with in the future.
No, as you're talking about that conversation that Jay from our team just had the other day with a team that all of a sudden they had analytics on what job aids were being used, right? And that totally changed how they were able to, the L&D department's able to approach their job, because they can talk to the people that are using it successfully. They can talk to the people that aren't using it successfully and get additional insights. And so it allows them to be so much more responsive to those different learning needs that are popping up.
And we say that with courses and classes too. A lot of people, when they start chunking things out into multiple assets, remove the class or make the class shorter. Make sure you're upgrading while you are doing this important work, because the whole goal of this is to enable learning, right? And so if you're cluttering things up, you're not enabling learning. You're just creating more for people to have to filter through. And sure, in our personal time, we have these choices on what we want to learn and so on. But at work, people have full-time jobs. Their full-time job is not to find learning or, to work extra hard to actually learn. That's our job, is to make it easy for them to learn. So think about all of those different aspects that feed into that challenge. And it's not just about delivering the right content, it's delivering it the right way. It's delivering it to the personas that it matters to, right? And it's delivering it in a way where you're clear. This is what I want you to do with this, not just what I want you to know. And delivering it in those moments of need, chunking it up, all of these things we've been talking about, keeping it updatable, keeping it fresh and relevant. That's all key. We have to stop looking at our job like it's this, and we have to recognize that technologies are empowering us to shift our capacity to this. It's not just that the business is asking us to do more and more and more. The technologies actually are removing some of the things that drained our capacity in the past. And if we're not acknowledging that and we're not making those smart choices, we're creating this I don't have capacity problem ourselves, really. And that's kind of a little harsh, but it's sometimes we humans, we love creating more problems for ourselves. And sometimes you just got to be like, I got to let this go. Okay, clearly this is helping me. Here's where I want to put my attention and time, and that's in modernizing my organization.
Well, and I love what the emphasis you keep putting on chunking the information. We used to talk to customers, if all of your content is connected with cement, we used to call it, you can't pull it apart. So let's connect it with Velcro. We can pull off a little bit here and we can use it in these different contexts, because, from our standpoint, our goal is, how can we remove the need for memorization? How can we help them succeed when they forgot? Which is why, as I look at the LCD model, that just resonates so much with me. Well, thank you, Crystal. Where should people go if they want to learn more about the LCD group and the LCD model?
So the easiest way to learn about us is through our website, www.learningclusterdesign.com. It's a great place for you to learn about learning clusters, how you can upskill your capability through the book, the workshop. We've got a number of our own learning assets there to support you in growing and adopting the model.
And if you want to learn more about ScreenSteps, go to ScreenSteps.com. It's really just designed to help L&D departments be very agile in responding to learning and training needs around procedures and policies. Thanks so much, Crystal.
Thank you.